Boris Johnson said that we, the West, made a terrible mistake relying on Russian oil after 2014. I think I'm right in saying you were Foreign Secretary in 2014. Do you agree that there was a mistake made?
Well, by the West collectively, yes. Of course, we refused to be more dependent on Russian oil. The first time David Cameron and I went to see Putin back in 2011, he wanted to sell us a lot more gas. He wanted to build a pipeline to Britain, and we weren't having that. And after 2014, I remember sitting at the EU Foreign Affairs Council telling everybody else they would have to be less dependent on Russia, that Europe needed an energy policy. So I think the Prime Minister's right about that. We urged that at the time, but there wasn't the appetite. Until 2 weeks ago, Germany in particular, and Italy indeed, were still set in the policy of, if we're more open to Russia and we trade with Russia and we rely on their energy, we can build better relations with them over time.
Mm.
Well, that approach has now been, we can now see that just while Putin is there, that isn't going to work.
Kezia, what do you make of the hindsight point of 2014 and also Boris Johnson's trip to Saudi Arabia to try to open up these supply routes?
Well, I think there's a certain unfortunate irony to the reality that we don't want to be reliant on one murderous dictator. So we're going to go and speak to another murderous regime in order to secure our energy supply. I don't think the Prime Minister has much choice, though, because in not accessing more oil and gas, and we will not be able to do anything about the spiralling cost of energy, which is going to hurt everybody here in the United Kingdom and hurt the Prime Minister's own prospects. So I don't think he has much choice but to do that. I wrote in the Times yesterday about my fears what is going to happen in the Ukraine is going to do for the wider debate around climate change action that we need to take. So I think he's stuck in that regard. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. I don't think there's much that we can do about that now. There's wasting precious energy trying to reconsider decisions taken several years ago. Now we have to face the reality of today, and that means, as William says, working with people that we don't necessarily like or respect on other issues.
Do you think there have to be any conditions, perhaps, or kind of requirements to any kind of deal with Saudi Arabia? For example, that it needs to be time limited, that they need to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you think anything like that would help?
I'd like to think in all trade negotiations, there's always the diplomatic element to it around countries' human rights record. And that's part of the dialogue that we have between countries in all of these situations. I certainly wouldn't want the United Kingdom to cede any further ground on these issues in order to secure the energy that we so desperately need. But, these things are incredibly difficult. But I do think the Prime Minister is right in going to make the conversations and hopefully the deals that are required here.
William Hague, what about the flip side of this? Because we've also had news that today the Polish, Czech and Slovenian prime ministers are off to Kyiv, off to an active war zone to go and meet Zelensky himself and provide, I'm sure, some incredible images in contrast to maybe images of our prime minister shaking hands with MBS. Is that something that our prime minister should think about doing?
Well, I hesitate to determine the Prime Minister's travel schedule, but he has been, of course, to many he's been around the region a lot. He's been hosting the leaders from the Baltic states and so on. So I don't think you say he's only going to Saudi Arabia. He's been all over the place in Europe and meeting different world leaders all of the time. I think that's very good if those leaders from Eastern Europe, Eastern EU and NATO states are going to Kiev because the whole world admires what President Zelensky is doing. But I'll just, since I'm aware of all the security implications of it, I'm not going to say the Prime Minister should go here or there. They'll have to weigh that up in Downing Street.
And Kezia, what about Putin's plan going forward? Many of us still, again, scratching our heads about what exactly he thinks the end game in this is going to be. We wake up this morning to news of yet another apartment block bombed on the outskirts of Kyiv, and also the Ministry of Defence confirming reports from the weekend that the Russians are looking to hold a referendum in Kherson, one of the cities which they've taken, to try and create a situation much like Donetsk and Lugansk where they self-declare as some kind of Russian separatist state. Do you think that's the kind of thing that really could replicate around Ukraine, maybe even just Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, and allow Putin to actually hold ground?
Well, I think that it's a sign that Putin's original plan isn't working. I don't think there is a win for him now. The win he was looking for was to advance into several Ukrainian cities within the first 48 hours and basically stake a claim to Ukraine as his country from that point onwards. That has failed, and we're looking at a long, drawn-out war, which is forcing him to consider other options, like what would ultimately be, a falsified referendum in different parts of the Ukraine. So it's just a sign that he's losing, increasingly looking for more desperate measures. On the one hand, you look at a so-called democratic solution of a referendum. The other option is just to flatten cities from the sky. Neither were what he was hoping to achieve within the first 48 hours of this invasion.
But William, do you think a mixture of those might actually allow Putin to hold on to some of the ground that he's made, both flattening them Grozny style, but also holding these fake referendums or putting puppet mayors in place by way of trying to get the local population to at least put up with Russian occupation?
Well, he definitely will hold these fake referendums. He's got a long track record on that. And partly that's how he gets elected himself, of course, where there is no media coverage or support for any of the other candidates. So, yeah, he will definitely try to do that. As to what his war aims are now, I think that the next 2 weeks is going to be so important and decisive because the Russians will think that if they can cut off the Ukrainian forces that are in the east by advancing from the south and surround or take Odessa and encircle Kiev, well, then they will be in a much stronger negotiating position for the negotiations that they are currently going through the motions of without actually bringing them to a point of success. Now, of course, on the other hand, if they can't do those things in the next few years, if they continue to be at a military standstill, well, then they're going to be in a weaker and weaker negotiating position. So a lot is riding on this next couple of weeks, and it doesn't look at the moment as if the Russian armed forces, the General Sheriff was saying earlier, and I've written about it in the Times this morning, really are able to coordinate themselves sufficiently well to pull off what they're trying to do. Whether they're explaining that to President Putin is perhaps a bit doubtful.
I read your column today, and I've heard this view expressed many times before that they didn't communicate to the troops on the ground that what they were actually doing, when they were going to do it. There isn't this kind of joined up approach. They have the kind of weaponry, but they don't have the strategy. And it still seems unbelievable to me, William, that they would decide to invade a country with all that in mind.
Well, I think first of all, I think the whole system is built on lies. The people at the top are lying to the people at the bottom about what their strategy is, and the people at the bottom are lying to the people at the top about what they're able to do. Well, this leads to great errors, of course, when an entire system is going around in circles, fooled by its own lies. And that is what is now happening in Russia, and it can happen in any dictatorship. And we should look out for that happening in China in the future as well. But also, of course, they expected that there wouldn't be so much resistance, which was another lie. That was the FSB, the Russian intelligence service, assuring Putin of what he wanted to hear, that he would be popular in many parts of Ukraine. So they finally got completely ensnared in a web of their own lies. It's a real salutary lesson to dictators around the world.
It certainly is. Let's talk about refugees now, shall we? It was around about 44,000 yesterday, then the website crashed. It now stands around about 89,000 people who have registered an initial interest in taking in Ukrainian refugees in the UK. We put the question to James Cleverly earlier about using Chevening, which has 115 bedrooms to house refugees. 115 rooms. He wasn't keen on that at all. Lisa Nandy was, of course. The other question, Kezia, is about the duty of care that we owe to these refugees, because we were led to believe that there were going to be DBS style checks, which are much more comprehensive than just checking people against the police national computer. But that's what's going to happen because we need to get this done quickly. Are you concerned, or do you think that speed is the most important thing here?
Well, look, first and foremost, isn't it incredible the compassion that the British public have shown here in wanting to welcome refugees into their own homes? I think that's got to be recognised first and foremost. However, the safety issues are really, really critical and really important. And there are organisations that have been doing this for a long time, organisations like Refugees at Home, who've been welcoming Afghan and Syrian refugees for some time, who are used to this process and understand how to make it work. And what we're talking about here is inviting people into not just a spare bedroom, but into their homes to have use of bathroom facilities and kitchens and to be able to freely come and go. There should be far greater inspections of this. And let's, not kid ourselves that pace is the primary issue. If pace was the primary issue, the United Kingdom would be doing what other European countries had done and allowed people to arrive in the UK much quicker without any visa checks or any suggestions of that. We're not going to win the pace game. So perhaps we should attempt to do better on the safety issues. And yes, do serious checks. Otherwise, we could be in a serious situation where women and children in particular could find themselves in very difficult situations, not just for a couple of weeks, but for 6 months. This is a 6-month commitment people are being asked to make.
Absolutely.
I would much rather that my taxes were being spent on providing proper facilities, support and signposting services for refugees coming to the United Kingdom, rather than necessarily subsidising someone in somebody else's spare bedroom.
William Hague, what about Kezia's point there that the government can't, this is an amazing thing. First of all, 89,000 people so far have signed up. Fantastic. But the government can't really pick when it wants to be quick and when it doesn't.
Well, I guess it's a very important point Kezia makes. And if I was running this, I would try to find the way through to have the speed and the safety. Now, that's you have to make choices in a war, of course. It's very difficult to do that. But of course, you could have a system where you do it as speedily as they are proposing, and I think the speed is pretty important given the desperate situation tens of thousands of people are in. But you can then follow up with the checks, so that if people don't pass the checks, the refugees are moved on away from them after a few weeks. So there are ways of approaching it like that. I would certainly I hope there is a task force of all the people running the IT, all the people who are setting the rules and communicating to everybody, all in one room, driving this along together. So it doesn't, with a minister coming into the room every 3 hours to say, how are you getting on? And you need new decisions. And with Michael Gove gripping this, they probably do have that. But I would want to know, so this doesn't get screwed up in some way, that there is that going on at the centre of government.
Just finally, both of you, a word about this news editor in Russia who stormed, if that's the right word, the back of a news broadcast on state television, holding a sign saying no to the war, they're lying to you, don't believe the Kremlin propaganda. She's now in custody, unfortunately, as you'd imagine. Kezia, what on earth did you make of that when you saw it?
Miraculous bravery. And I think it's only acts like that that are going to, in the sum total of their parts over a number of weeks, perhaps months, let Russian citizens see the truth of what's really happening. And that's the only hope we have of any serious change to the regime in Russia. I can't imagine or even contemplate seriously the bravery of that woman. And we've seen so many individual acts like that on Twitter. I can picture one other young woman who just held up a sign in front of a camera with the Russian for 2 words. It didn't have a political statement on it. It just said 2 words. And I thought that was such a brilliant encapsulation of what the point she was trying to prove. It's not what she was saying. It was the temerity of saying it, which was going to put her in the gulag that night. That's incredible acts of bravery. And we need an awful lot more of that.
And the fact, William, that this is happening on state television on a big channel, it's not like this is a protest in a square or some small independent radio station. This is sort of main television TV news in Russia. Does that give us a hint that maybe public opinion is turning, or is that being too hopeful?
Well, I think that might be a bit too hopeful, but it does show there's a lot of discontent in Russia. If things keep going badly for Russia, that is going to get worse. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't do what that courageous woman has done because they are afraid. And she's been afraid until now, but decided to speak out. there is going to come a sudden moment in Russia. It might take months, it might take years, when suddenly, from one day to the next, people are not afraid. And that's the point where the whole rotten, lying system comes crashing down. And I think you can see that is going to happen. We just don't know how long it is going to take.
Thank you both so much for your time this morning. William Hague, Kezia Dugdale, of course, former fantastic politicians, but for our purposes, Times columnists.
Yes.